Ezekiel chapter 1, God's splendor. But before we actually delve into it, there's a little bit of foundational truths that we need to look at. This passage of Ezekiel basically is about God's calling Ezekiel. But this also is true for us. And what we're going to look at is we're going to look a little bit at God's calling in our lives, and then we're going to go into Ezekiel and look at who's calling. That whole section of Ezekiel, again, is one of these Bible passages, one of these chapters that has been interpreted in so many far-fetched ways that, again, it baffles me how people can miss the truth of what's in there. Because like we've said every time, if it is in the Bible, it is about Jesus. So we're going to find Jesus in Ezekiel chapter 1. Before we go there, we're going to look at calling. We're going to look at who is called and who is called to what. Now, when we think of calling, we think of, okay, God's got a calling on my life, and basically it's probably like this couple here. I'm called to be a missionary, or like Bobby, called to be a pastor, or like me, I'm called to be a teacher. So it's one of these more lofty things and in our lives, and we feel as though, well, that's those people there are called for these things. I'm really not called in that same way. So I'm really, in God's eyes, not quite as important and quite as He hasn't gifted me in the same way. So I really don't count as much. That, of course, is absolutely untrue because God calls all of us. First of all, we're called to believe. Everyone here and everyone who hears the gospel is called to believe. Not just to believe in God, but like we've talked about before, to believe God. To believe what God teaches us and tells us through His Word is truth. To believe this. We're all called to that. Okay, we're also all called to gather together. We're called to come to church. All of us receive this calling. This isn't just for some or just for others, but we are called to fellowship with one another. We are called to love one another. As Christ loves the church, we are called to love each other and to demonstrate this love that's genuine, not, well, I like you as long as you're good to me, but if you're bad to me, now I'm going to hold this grudge against you, and I'm going to, you might say, just kind of avoid you. I don't want anything to do with you because you were mean to me, so I'm going to be mean in return. No, unconditional love. It doesn't mean that we loan our car out to somebody and they turn around and then they smash it and we say, well, I forgive you. That's my Christian duty. And then the next week they want to borrow it again, so you loan it to them. They crack it up again and they say, well, I'm supposed to forgive. And like Jesus said, when the disciples asked him how many times I'm supposed to give, 70 times 7. Does that mean I've got to let somebody borrow my car and smash it 444 times? No, it's not logical, okay? That's not love. That's enabling. Enabling bad behavior is not love. Love is, no, you may not borrow my car because of the fact that you're going to have to learn how to drive first. Not because the car is important, but because you are. You have to learn this responsibility. Or you can do the same thing with loaning somebody money or whatever. It all falls in that same category. This isn't love. It's also not love when we are accepting of bad behavior. That's not being loving. That's, again, being enabling. So we are all called to love in true love, to love in truth, not in appeasement. Big difference. Now, we're all individually called also in different parts of our lives. We may be called to be a mother, we may be called to be a father, we may be called to be good parents. All of these things all fall into this calling. in different times in our life, different things, seasons of our life, our callings change. Now, when our children are young, we are called to care for them as young children and to teach them and train them and raise them in the fear and admonition of the Lord. We are called to this. When the children get older, that doesn't totally go away, but it changes. We're no longer controlling them as a little child. We are accepting that what we have done was either right or wrong, and we're now more dependent upon God to deal in our children's lives. Called to take care of elderly parents. This is, again, a calling of God's people are called to do these things. It's not like it's, well, I've got more important things to do. No, God has established the family in a manner and in ages to where we are capable of doing things that we couldn't otherwise. We can't take care of our elderly parents when we have little children in the house. It becomes almost an impossibility. Now, some people have struggled and got caught up in the middle of that, but to a large extent, on an average, most of the time, our older parents are older when our children have grown. God's timing in the family life is his timing, and he's established it for a reason. So we're called to all these things. We're called to follow what God has taught us in his word, simply from the littlest, what we might call the littlest things, to the big things. We are called to do what God has called us to do until he calls us to go do something else. It doesn't go on, okay, well, I'm called to this, but I see this thing over here that is really appealing and I kind of want to chase down after that. Did God call you to change your path? To change what he's called you to? And now there's the difference between being called and having our human desires try to make it sound like or feel like we are called, and distinguishing between the two. If you don't know for a fact that you've been called to a certain thing outside of the basic life that the Bible teaches us, to called and to go into this or go into that, if you don't clearly see that, you haven't been called. It can't be, oh no, I want to. It has to be, I've been called to. And if we've been called to, we've also been equipped for, and we've also been gifted with. All these things come into play. Because we're never called into something that is impossible for us to do. Interesting little story from Howard last night. When he was a young Christian, and he was involved with the Navigators, and they were doing a fundraiser. And of course, he's used this at the fundraiser last night, which was really intelligent. But anyway, he said, the leader got up front and said, instead of you deciding what you can give now, take a moment and have God tell you how much you are going to give next week. Whatever number God pops into your head, you write that down on a piece of paper, and that's the number. Don't look at all the other aspects of your life, all the things that are going on. Just whatever number God gives you, you put that down. Well, at that time, Howard was in the military. He was earning $700 a month, and God gave him the number of $400. Well, $400 out of a $700 a month income is a tremendous amount of money. The following week, he got a letter in the mail from AT&T. He had been overpaying on his phone bill for a year. It came to $400. Just trusting God, just believing God. Okay? And even sometimes when it doesn't make sense. But if God clearly tells us something, listen. Do it. Now we're going to take a look at the who called. And Ezekiel chapter 1 is a huge demonstration of who is calling. Ezekiel is a priest who is called to be a prophet. He was in exile in Babylon in the first wave of exiles 11 years before the final fall of Jerusalem. Ezekiel receives a dramatic call from God. Many false prophets at that time were telling the people God would come and save them and they would soon return to Jerusalem. The time in history in which this is talking about is the same time in history of when Daniel was in captivity. So they were contemporaries of each other. Ezekiel is called by God to be a prophet to the exiles that are in Babylon. And this group of people, if you understand a little bit about ancient history, when a nation would take over another nation, they would glean out the cream of the crop, the best people, the most intelligent, the strongest, the ones that excelled the best. They would grab those up first and bring them to their country because they're going to use their abilities. So Ezekiel is grabbed up in this first wave. This is when Jehoiachim was the king in Israel. And the people were talking about, well, don't worry about it. God is going to take care of things. He's going to bring us back shortly. So stop worrying about this. These were what the false prophets were saying. Now, as we know from Daniel, they were going to be there for 70 years. So that entire generation was not going back. But it was this teaching, this preaching of God is going to fix it. It doesn't matter that we as a nation were sinful, that we've been ignoring him for years and years. That doesn't really matter. We're Israelites. We're Jews. We're loved by God. So no matter what we do, God will never let really bad things happen to us. We're Americans. We're Christians. All these things that are going on in the world don't matter to us. We can do whatever we want to do because it doesn't matter. God is going to take care of us. Get caught up in that lie. In Jeremiah, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, like those good figs, so I will regard as good the exiles from Judah, whom I have sent away from the place in the land of the Chaldeans. Jeremiah is talking about the same group of people and how there is the good ones are here and they're actually being pulled out of the nation of Israel from their homeland for their safety, for their benefit. He's separating them out. And actually there were benefits that the captives received that those that stayed behind didn't get. But God was protecting his people. But the thing is we have to remember is the best men, those that are dearest to God, often share in the common problems of this life. Also in the public and national judgments that are infected for sin. Even though they did nothing to be guilty of, they show who they are through their spirits while living in those times. So we can get, as a nation can suffer the consequences of failing to stay true to God. The true Christians in the middle of that nation are going to suffer the consequences also. In the same manner in which a father that is bad, the children suffer the consequences in the home life. It's not that the kids did something wrong, and it's not that the true believers did something wrong. It's the way things are, the way things operate in the kingdom of God. But in the midst of those problems that are taking place, God is there protecting his people in ways and manners that the others don't get, they don't receive. Because God does care about his people. But there still can be caught up into it. Now we'll actually get into Ezekiel. Verse 1. In the 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, there was as I was among the exiles at the river Shibar, the heavens were open, and I saw visions of God. Now it's very important that we start here and realize Ezekiel, he is standing there, and he's seeing a vision. He's not transported someplace. It's not a reality of a physical thing. It is a vision. And then we can get a little bit more of that when you get towards the end of the book of Ezekiel in chapter 43. And it was like the appearance of the vision that I saw like the visions that I saw when he came to destroy the city. And the visions were like the visions which I saw by the river Shibar, and fell on my face. So again, he received that vision again later on towards the end of the book. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin, the word of the Lord came to the priest Ezekiel, son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Shibar, and the hand of the Lord was on him there. Okay, here again, it's getting confirmed. As I looked, the stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud with brightness around it, and flashing forth continually, and in the middle of the fire, something like gleaming amber. So he's now starting to see something. Something is coming. He can't distinguish everything yet, but he's starting to see it. But it reminds us of in the book of Exodus, when God came down to the mountain. And so it was about the 3rd day, and it was the morning, and there was thunder and lightning, flashes, and a thick cloud upon the mountain, and the very loud trumpet sound, so that the people who were in the camp trembled. God was coming. Now back to Ezekiel. Within it, there were figures resembling 4 living beings, and thus was their appearance. They had human form. Each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and their feet were like a calf's hoof, and they gleamed in burnished bronze. Under the wings and on the 4 sides were the human heads. And as for the faces and the wings of the 4 of them, their wings touched one another, and their faces did not turn when they moved. Each went straight forward. Now that's a mouthful right there, okay? And we're trying to envision this whole scene, and because we try so hard to try to put a specific explanation on every tiny little aspect of this, we get lost. This is a scene, this is a vision, this is a whole, and the whole is going to build as we move along. We see things that are talking about humans, they're talking about animals, they're talking about angels. All of these things are being combined. We also see in this little piece here where they go straight forward. That's going to be a big part as we move along. And as for the form of their faces, they each had the face of a man. All 4 had the faces of a lion, and on the right was the face of a bull. On the left, and all 4 faces the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above, and they were touching another being, and 2 covered their bodies. So you have wings reaching out. You have wings down at their side. The cherubim. Okay, you're getting the vision again of God's holy place. Each one is, you might say, is showing all of the different aspects of creation, and the superiority aspects is really what's being shown. You got it right there. Each of them went straight forward whenever the Spirit was about to go, and they would go without turning as they went. In the midst of the living beings, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches darting back and forth among the living beings. And the fire was bright, and the lightning was flashing from the fire, and the living beings ran to and fro like bolts of lightning. Again, another whole mouthful here, where we can see this splendorous vision, and we see all this glory that's going on. We see the lightning. We see the glowing. Okay, these are all things that are, you may say, power of light, seeing and understanding and knowing, and also being directed, though. It's not just they're going to and fro, but there's a purpose. We're going to see that build. Now as I looked on the 4 living beings, behold, there was 1 wheel on the earth beside the living beings, for each had 4 of them. The appearance of the wheels and their workmanship was like sparkling beryl, and the 4 of them had the same form. Their appearance and their workmanship being of 1 wheel were within another. Wherever they moved in any other of the 4 directions without turning as they went. Now when we first look at this wheel within a wheel, we think of a circle and a smaller circle inside the circle. Now try to vision it as a circle and then turning 90 degrees to it, another circle. A wheel within a wheel. Now this was, by having your wheel within a wheel in this manner, you now see the going straight, going straight, going straight. It's not the wheel within a wheel, it's the wheel within a wheel. Okay? That helps us to understand this going straight. Because it's not, like I said, what we first think. And as for the rims, they were lofty and awesome, and the rims of all four of them were full of eyes around and about. Wherever the living beings moved, the wheels moved with them, and whenever the living beings rose from the earth, the wheels rose also. Wherever the Spirit was about to go, they would go that direction, and the wheels rose close behind them, and the spirit of the living being was in the wheels. Okay, wheels determine direction. Wheels also carry. You've got the Spirit is the direction of the Spirit is determining where the wheels go. Now, when the wheels go this way or they go that way, the vision is going with it. It's all part of the same thing. It's got eyes all about. It's seeing all. So it's always going straight the way that God says it's going to go, because the Spirit is guiding it. And it's going and it's seeing all that's going on. We also have creation here. We have all the different faces and all these aspects of it. And rising up from the earth. So it's on the earth, but it's also rising up above the earth. So it's encompassing everything in regards to creation. And it's all being guided by the Spirit of God. And it's seeing everything because it has eyes all around. But the fact that it's going straight regardless is because God doesn't waver. He's always going, he doesn't waver. He always goes straight. He has a destination. He has a plan. It is laid out clearly. And we're going to go that way. Now we're going to go that way. It's always in God's plan. Wherever these went, and wherever they stood still, these stood still. And wherever they rose from the earth, the wheels rose close beside them. For the Spirit of the living being was in the wheel. This is just kind of confirming what we already looked at. Now, over the heads of the human beings, there was something like an expanse, like an awesome gleam of crystal spread out over their heads. Under the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight, one toward one another. Each one also had two wings covering their body on the one side and on the other. Here again, it's kind of confirming what we've already saw. But it's added this expanse above it. And that added expanse is also just giving us a little bit more information of this vision. I also heard the sound of the wings of the sound of abundant waters as they went, like the voice of the Almighty, a sound of tumult like the sound of an army camp. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. And there came a voice from above the expanse that was over their heads. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. So we have the wheels, we have the angels, we have the faces, we have all the fire, the lightning, the eyes, and now we have an expanse above it. In other words, accompanying all of it. And now we get a voice from the Almighty above the expanse. Now, above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne. Like lapaz and lazuli, the appearance of which resembled the throne. That's a really dark blue precious stone. And that resembled a throne up high with a figure of the appearance of a man. You see the appearance, the figure of a man? Who is above all. And this is the appearance of a man. It's Jesus. See Jesus here? He is above all. He is reigning and ruling. Now you say, well, this is Old Testament. Yeah. It doesn't matter. He's not bound by time. Jesus is here. And he is above all of creation. And the splendor and the glory that is displayed on who God is, because Jesus is God. The Spirit sees all, because the Spirit is guiding the movement of all of creation. We see the movement, we see the creation being moved and guided by the Spirit. We also see that it's always going straight. And it's always going straight in the manner in which God calls it to go, through the power of his Spirit. And above and over all is Jesus, because he is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And then, as the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. Such was the appearance of the likeness and the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard a voice speaking. This is who's calling. Remember back in the beginning, they were talking about all the things that we are called to as a child of God? This is who is calling. This majesty, this greatness, this glory of our God is who is calling. Because Ezekiel heard a voice. When we hear God calling, this is who's calling. This should be the vision in our head of who I'm listening to, of who's speaking to me. The one who is above all.